I call the Honourable Minister Georgina Te Heoheo. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair. Tēnā koutou. Part 3, just a few comments on Part 3, amendments to other acts, regulations, transitional provisions and other miscellaneous matters. Part 3 of the bill provides for amendments to other enactments and also provides for various regulation-making powers. The transitional provisions allow New Zealand and overseas auditors who have acted as an auditor in respect of an issuer audit at any time in the 2 years prior to be treated as holding a licence, subject to meeting transitional requirements prescribed by the FMA. Part 3 also includes various miscellaneous provisions which first exempt the Auditor General from the requirement to hold a licence, next to provide the FMA with the power to amend or revoke orders, directions or notices under the bill, and third, to provide for an offence of making false declarations for the purpose of obtaining any licence, registration or accreditation under the bill. The SOP makes a number of consequential changes to the Financial Markets Authority Act to permit the FMA to exercise its general information gathering powers and information sharing powers when carrying out its auditor regulation functions, and exercise the same statutory management related powers that the Registrar of Companies has under the Corporations, Investigations and Management Act, but only in relation to an accredited body. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Chair. I call the Honourable Member Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. As the Honourable Minister has outlined, she's given a pretty good overview of what Part 3 contains. There are a couple of points that I would like to point out, Mr Chair. In the regulations, it talks about, Auditors and Council can make regulations for any number of following purposes. Part I is prescribing fees and charges that the Registrar or the FMA may require to be paid to him, her or it, or at rate in which, or the method by which fees and charges are to be calculated in connection with the exercise of the performance by the Registrar or the FMA. Now, Mr Chair, I'm just wondering if if the rates have actually been set yet, or if the FMA or the Registrar has any idea of what the rates will be, or if they are still to be set, or if in fact the FMA, even though it's just started, has in fact come up with a schedule of rates. And again, I suppose my ever so slight concern is we need to ensure, I believe, Mr Chair, that this is not expensive in any way, shape or form, or nor does it ever hinder any New Zealander from accessing the Registrar to have a look to see if in fact an auditor is on that. Now, Mr Chair, before you arrived, I was talking about the Registrar that is there, that holds the name and the occupation, a whole lot of details of registered auditors. And the Minister stood up and said that this is an online document. Of course it's an online document. The Act says it must be an online document. Well, in fact, Mr Chair, it doesn't say that at all. It says it may be an online document. And this is where I have a slight concern. I assume it will be an online document. We are in the 21st century. It's a reasonable expectation, Mr Chair. And I'm assuming that any person can go and have a look at this online register. It makes sense. If you're a licensed auditor, I would have thought, want to be on this register. But I hope, and I do hope, that there is no cost to access this register, because if there is, it may put people off. And that's my only concern, and I'm just wondering if in fact those fees would be set. If I go to Subpart 3, Transitional Provisions, Clause 75, Mr Chair, it says certain auditors treated as holding a licence. And when I first read this, it sort of set off alarm bells, because what it does say is this section applies to a person who, immediately before the commencement of this section, is a chartered accountant who has, at any time within the 2-year period before that commencement, acted as an auditor in respect of an issuer audit and satisfies the transitional requirements. And I thought, well, I suppose it's got to make sense, doesn't it? There are a lot of accountants out there who have acted as auditors, and I suppose you can't say, OK, this regime is coming into place on this point, and at this point, if you have acted as an auditor but you're an accountant and you haven't got a licence, you can no longer practice business. So there has to be a transition period. I understand that, Mr Chair, but I just hope that again that this is well policed, and that the FMA or an accredited authority, accredited body, actually does ensure that this is very well policed. Now, I know this. I have a superannuation fund, as a lot of us do, audited, and you talk to a lot of accountants and they say, no, you must go to a licensed auditor. So the message is out there, the word is out there, but I'm just hoping that this is not taken advantage of and that it is very well policed. The other thing I'd like to talk about, Mr Chair, is I'm going back to Clause 72, amendments to other Act. As we have talked about on a couple of occasions, this is actually a very complex piece of legislation. The name wouldn't suggest it is, the Auditor Regulation External Reporting Bill, but it is a complex piece of legislation because what it does is it basically turns on its head or regulates the whole of the auditing industry. And as a consequence of this, there are a number of acts that have actually been amended as a result of this Act. And the first one is the Building Societies Act 1965, the Companies Act, as you would imagine. Clause 198 in the Companies Act, it talks about the appointment of partnership. We've talked about this before. A partnership may be appointed by the firm name to be the auditor of the company if, in the case of a company that is an issuer, the partnership is registered as an audit firm, or in any other case, all or some of the partners are persons who are qualified to be appointed as auditors of that company. And that makes sense. That makes sense. It is not in the interest of any company whatsoever to say they are auditors, to say they have qualified auditors, and then to send someone out to do an audit who isn't a qualified auditor. Friendly Societies and Credit Union Act 1982, the Industrial and Provident Societies Act 1908, there's an old act, Mr Chair, I think it was before you entered the House. Actually, it's not that old, actually.
Order. The member must not refuse.
I apologise, Mr Chair. Yes, I apologise. And this talks about a registered audit firm by its firm name to be the auditors. Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Member
Thank you very
Stuart
much.
Nash.
By its firm name to be the auditors of the society, in which case all partners of the firm from time to time who are licensed auditors are deemed to be appointed as auditors. And I suppose what I'm trying to highlight here, Mr Chair, is in fact the process was pretty lax before this bill came into place. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why every single member in this House is supporting it, but it was pretty lax. According to these acts that have now been amended to incorporate the provisions in this Act, you didn't actually have to be a registered auditor. And there is no doubt about it, most of the organisations that were covered under the Industrial and Provident Societies Act, they acted with competency. The auditors that did the work there, they were good people. But if my experience with any of these sorts of organisations is like a lot of others, what happens is a very well-meaning person says, I can do the accounts. And everyone else says, great, there's someone who's prepared to do the accounts. You can be the treasurer, you can do the accounts. What these acts now require, it's like a lot of parties, like a lot of organisations that we're members of. We love people. Treasurer, it's hard to find a treasurer. But what we're now saying is these accounts now have to be audited. Now that makes sense. All it does is it actually protects that society, protects the members of the board or whatever, or the governing body. The Public Audit Act. Now this is quite interesting, Mr Chair, because what it does say here is the Auditor General may ask for quality review in respect of audits of issuers. Now, the Auditor General may ask the Financial Market Authority to arrange for a quality review to be carried out on the systems, policies and procedures applying to the employees of the Auditor General who assist in the carrying out of audits of issuers under this Act. Now, what I am hoping, Mr Chair, is in fact where it says may, so it doesn't compel the Auditor General, but what I am hoping is that the Auditor General does this with monotonous regularity in the first couple of years. Now, the reason I say that is, as I've said before, a recurring theme throughout this bill is actually restoring the confidence of everyday New Zealanders in our financial markets. And I think if the Auditor General carries out a number of these audits or these quality audits or asks the Financial Market Authority to arrange for a quality review, that will just help in the ongoing process of building up the confidence that New Zealanders have in our financial markets, and it'll get them reinvesting. You know, after we've taken a hit of $6 billion, then a lot of people are scared off, and we don't need that as an economy to go forward. There is another act, Mr Chair, and that's the Securities Act 1978. And again, it says, for the purposes of this Act, this is an addition to the Securities Act, for the purposes of this Act, qualified auditor means a licensed auditor or a registered audit firm, or in the case of an issuer that is a public entity under the Public Audit Act 2001, the Auditor General or any other person who may act as an auditor under that Act. And I suppose what I am saying, again, I'm highlighting that the legislation, or that these acts that are being amended, they really didn't meet the purpose or meet the requirements of the investing public. This goes a long way. This 100-page piece of legislation goes a long way. It won't do it on its own. We acknowledge that. There is still a lot of work to be done. And as members of this House will know, there are a number of pieces of legislation that have already been passed, that have already gone through this House, which are designed to increase the confidence. And the last Act, Mr Chair, that has been amended due to the provisions of this Act is the Superannuation Schemes Act 1989. And again, what it does is it defines an auditor as a chartered accountant within the meaning of section of New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants Act and a licensed auditor. Auditor. So I think this is a very good piece of legislation. It is complex. It is complex. That is one of my concerns, Mr Chair. It is complex. But I'm hoping that complexity does not put people off from gaining an understanding of what we're trying to do, and I certainly hope it does not put auditors off from getting licences or chartered accountants or becoming licensed auditors, because we need licensed auditors and we need them to do a very competent job. This Act goes a long way. Thank you very much, Mr Chair.